14 years ago, Detective Robert Mitchell left for what should have been a peaceful weekend hike near Yosemite National Park. He never returned home, leaving behind a devastated wife, 2 teenage children, and unanswered questions that would haunt the Fresno Police Department for over a decade. The disappearance of a respected 20-year veteran detective plunged his family into unimaginable grief and left the entire community searching for answers that seemed impossible to find. Before we continue, please subscribe, like the video, and hit the notification bell. This helps the channel bring you more stories like this one. It was September 18, 2010, a crisp Saturday morning when Detective Robert Mitchell kissed his wife Sarah goodbye at their modest home in Clovis. At 46, Robert was known throughout the department as Old Reliable, a methodical investigator who never left a case unsolved. His colleagues respected his dedication, his family cherished his unwavering presence, and his community trusted him implicitly. "I need this weekend," Robert had told Sarah the night before, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The stress of his current caseload, a series of burglaries that had plagued the east side of Fresno for months, had been wearing on him. Dark circles under his eyes told the story of too many late nights and not enough rest. Sarah Mitchell, an elementary school teacher who had been married to Robert for 22 years, understood her husband's need for solitude. The mountains had always been his sanctuary, the place where he went to clear his mind and find perspective. She packed his favorite trail mix and reminded him to check in every few hours, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage. At 7:30 a.m., Robert loaded his hiking gear into his Ford Explorer and headed east toward the Sierra Nevada mountains. His planned route would take him through the Hetch Hetchy area, a less crowded section of the Yosemite region, known for its pristine wilderness and challenging terrain. He had hiked these trails dozens of times before, always returning with stories of wildlife encounters and breathtaking vistas. The last confirmed sighting of Detective Mitchell came from a gas station attendant in Groveland, a small mountain town about 25 miles from his intended hiking area. Security footage showed Robert purchasing water and energy bars at 9:15 a.m., appearing relaxed and in good spirits. He chatted briefly with the attendant about the weather forecast and mentioned he planned to be back on the road by late afternoon. At 11:30 a.m., Robert made his final radio check-in with the Fresno Police Department dispatch, a routine call he made whenever he ventured into remote areas. His voice was clear and upbeat as he reported his location near the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir and confirmed his expected return time. Unit 47 checking in. "Beautiful day up here. ETA back to civilization around 1700 hours. Mitchell out." Those would be the last words anyone would hear from Detective Robert Mitchell. When 7 p.m. came and went without word from Robert, Sarah's concern began to grow. By 9 p.m., when her calls went straight to voicemail, she contacted the department. By midnight, when Robert still hadn't returned, a search and rescue operation was quietly initiated. The initial search focused on the Hetch Hetchy area, where Robert had made his last radio contact. Search teams combed the established trails, while helicopters swept the broader region from above. For 3 days, over 200 volunteers joined law enforcement officials in an exhaustive search that covered nearly 50 square miles of rugged mountain terrain. They found his Ford Explorer parked at a remote trailhead, unlocked with his keys still in the ignition. Inside, investigators discovered Robert's wallet containing his badge, identification, and $200 in cash, items that suggested he hadn't planned an extended absence. His cell phone was found on the front seat, its battery dead. The discovery of Robert's hiking backpack 2 miles from his vehicle provided the only tangible clue to his fate. The pack contained his water bottles still full and his trail mix untouched. Strangely, his service weapon was missing, along with the backup pistol he always carried while hiking. This detail would later become a source of intense speculation and investigation. As days turned into weeks, the official search was scaled back, but Sarah Mitchell refused to give up hope. She organized private search parties, hired a private investigator, and spent her life savings following every lead, no matter how remote. The Fresno Police Department officially classified Robert as a missing person, with the case remaining active, but receiving diminishing resources as time passed. The disappearance of Detective Robert Mitchell created ripples throughout the law enforcement community. His active cases were reassigned. His desk remained untouched for months, and his colleagues struggled to understand how an experienced outdoorsman and trained law enforcement officer could simply vanish without a trace. For 14 long years, the Mitchell family lived in a painful limbo between hope and despair. Sarah never remarried, keeping Robert's coffee cup on the kitchen counter and his badge replica in a frame on the mantel. Their children, Michael and Jennifer, grew up with the ghost of their father's presence, graduating high school and college, while wondering if he might somehow appear at their ceremonies. The case files grew thick with false leads, reported sightings, and investigative dead ends. Amateur detectives and true crime enthusiasts offered theories ranging from animal attacks to voluntary disappearance, but none could explain the missing weapons or the complete absence of remains in an area thoroughly searched multiple times. Then, on a cold February morning in 2024, everything changed. A routine environmental survey along Boulder Creek, 15 miles from where Robert's car was found, would uncover evidence that had been hidden beneath the water for over a decade, evidence that would force everyone to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the disappearance of Detective Robert Mitchell. The discovery that would crack open the Robert Mitchell case came from an unexpected source, a graduate student conducting research on water quality in remote mountain streams. What began as a routine environmental survey would evolve into the breakthrough that law enforcement had been waiting for since 2010. Emma Rodriguez, a 24-year-old ecology student from UC Davis, had spent 3 months documenting wildlife patterns in the Sierra Nevada foothills as part of her master's thesis. Her research focused on how climate change was affecting aquatic ecosystems in remote mountain areas, work that required her to wade through dozens of streams and creeks throughout the region. On February 12, 2024, Emma was collecting water samples from Boulder Creek, a narrow waterway that wound through a secluded valley about 15 miles southeast of the Hetch Hetchy area. The recent winter rains had swollen the creek to higher levels than usual, and the increased flow had shifted sediments that had remained undisturbed for years. As Emma knelt beside the water to fill her sample containers, something metallic glinted in the rocky streambed. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a piece of debris, perhaps a discarded can or bottle cap. But as she reached into the icy water to remove what she assumed was litter, her fingers closed around something that made her heart skip a beat. It was a police badge, tarnished by years underwater, but still clearly identifiable. The 5-pointed star bore the seal of the Fresno Police Department, and though the badge number was partially obscured by mineral deposits, enough digits were visible to make Emma realize she had discovered something significant. Emma immediately contacted local authorities, who dispatched a team to the remote location within hours. The badge was carefully extracted from the creek bed, using proper evidence collection procedures, photographed extensively, and transported to the Fresno County Sheriff's Forensics Laboratory for analysis. The badge number, 2847, matched the records perfectly. It belonged to Detective Robert Mitchell, reported missing over 13 years earlier. The discovery sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community and rekindled hope in the hearts of the Mitchell family, who had never stopped believing that their husband and father would somehow be found. Sarah Mitchell received the call on a Tuesday afternoon while she was grading papers in her classroom. The voice on the other end belonged to Detective Lisa Chen, who had recently been assigned to review cold cases in the department. "Mrs. Mitchell," Detective Chen said gently, "we found something that belonged to your husband. We'd like you to come to the station when you're able." The reunion with Robert's badge was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Sarah held the tarnished metal in her trembling hands, running her fingers over the familiar weight and shape that she remembered from the thousands of times she had seen it pinned to Robert's uniform. The badge represented not just his career, but his identity as a protector and servant of justice. "Finding Robert's badge changes everything," Detective Chen explained to the Mitchell family during their meeting. "It provides us with a specific location to focus our investigation, and it raises important questions about what happened in that area." The creek where the badge was discovered had never been searched during the original investigation, primarily because it was considered too far from Robert's last known location. The forensics analysis of the badge revealed intriguing details. While the metal showed expected signs of prolonged water exposure, there were also scratches and impact marks that suggested it had been forcibly removed rather than simply lost. More significantly, traces of foreign material embedded in the badge's surface were being analyzed to determine if they might provide clues about where Robert had been before the badge ended up in the creek. Detective Chen assembled a new investigative team specifically focused on the Mitchell case. The team included experienced homicide investigators, forensic specialists, and search and rescue experts who had worked on the original case. Their first priority was to conduct an extensive search of the Boulder Creek area, using advanced ground-penetrating radar and underwater detection equipment that hadn't been available in 2010. The renewed investigation also meant revisiting witness statements and evidence from the original case. Detective Chen discovered that the Boulder Creek area had been mentioned in one witness report that was apparently overlooked during the initial investigation. A local rancher had reported seeing a vehicle matching Robert's Ford Explorer parked along a dirt road near the creek on the day of his disappearance. But this lead had never been thoroughly investigated. For the Mitchell family, the discovery of the badge represented the first concrete evidence that their patriarch's fate might finally be uncovered. Michael Mitchell, now 32 and working as a software engineer, took leave from his job to assist with the investigation. Jennifer, 29 and a nurse practitioner, coordinated with local media to ensure the renewed case received appropriate attention. "We've never stopped looking for Dad," Michael told reporters during a press conference announcing the discovery. "This badge proves that there are still answers out there, still pieces of the puzzle that can be found. We won't rest until we know what happened to him." The discovery also attracted attention from cold case specialists and true crime investigators across the country. The Robert Mitchell case had been featured in several missing person databases and online forums over the years, but the badge discovery generated renewed interest from amateur detectives and professional investigators alike. Local authorities established a dedicated tip line for the Mitchell case and began receiving dozens of calls from people who claimed to have information about Robert's disappearance. Most of these tips proved to be unsubstantiated, but Detective Chen's team meticulously followed up on every lead, hoping that someone might have witnessed something significant that they hadn't reported years earlier. The search around Boulder Creek expanded to include a broader area encompassing several square miles of rugged terrain. Teams used metal detectors, cadaver dogs, and specialized underwater equipment to search for any additional evidence that might have been scattered or hidden in the area. The work was painstaking and often dangerous, as the mountainous terrain included steep cliffs, dense vegetation, and areas that were difficult to access even with specialized equipment. As winter turned to spring in 2024, the investigation team made preparations for an extensive summer search operation. The seasonal weather patterns meant that water levels in area streams would be at their lowest point, potentially exposing evidence that had been submerged during other times of the year. The badge discovery had transformed the Robert Mitchell case from a cold missing person investigation into an active homicide case. While no body had been found, the circumstances surrounding the badge's location and condition suggested that Robert had met with foul play rather than simply becoming lost in the wilderness. For Sarah Mitchell, the renewed investigation brought both hope and renewed pain. After 13 years of wondering, she was finally getting answers, but those answers were forcing her to confront the possibility that her husband had been the victim of violence rather than a tragic accident. The discovery of Robert Mitchell's badge in Boulder Creek forced investigators to completely re-examine the original case file, and what they found revealed troubling gaps in the 2010 investigation. As Detective Lisa Chen dug deeper into the archived reports, witness statements, and evidence logs, a pattern of overlooked leads and unexplored possibilities began to emerge. The original investigation had been led by Detective Frank Morrison, a veteran investigator who had since retired from the Fresno Police Department. Morrison's case notes indicated that he had focused primarily on the theory that Robert had suffered an accident while hiking, possibly falling from a cliff or becoming lost in the wilderness. This assumption had guided the search efforts and may have caused investigators to dismiss evidence that didn't fit the accidental death narrative. One of the most significant oversights involved the witness report from Eugene Watkins, a 67-year-old rancher, whose property bordered the area where Robert's badge was eventually found. Watkins had contacted police 3 days after Robert's disappearance, reporting that he had seen a dark-colored SUV parked along the access road near Boulder Creek on September 18, 2010, the same day Robert vanished. According to Watkins's original statement, The vehicle had been parked in an unusual location, far from any established hiking trails or camping areas. More importantly, Watkins reported seeing two people near the vehicle, though he couldn't make out specific details from his position across the valley. The rancher had thought it odd, because the area was typically deserted, especially on weekdays when most hikers visited more accessible parts of the park. Detective Morrison's notes indicated that he had assigned a junior officer to follow up on Watkins' report, but there was no record of this investigation being completed. The witness statement had been filed away and apparently forgotten as the search focused on the Hetch Hetchy area where Robert's vehicle was found. Detective Chen decided to interview Eugene Watkins again, hoping that his memory might provide additional details that could help the current investigation. Now 81 years old and living in a nursing facility in Modesto, Watkins proved to have remarkably clear recollections of that September day 14 years earlier. "I remember it because it was so unusual," Watkins told Detective Chen during their meeting. "In all my years ranching that land, I'd maybe seen a dozen vehicles park in that spot. It's not near any trails, and there's nothing there that would attract tourists or hikers. When I saw that SUV, I figured someone was either lost or up to no good." Watkins provided additional details that hadn't been included in his original statement. He recalled that one of the two people he observed appeared to be wearing dark clothing, possibly a uniform of some kind. The other person was smaller in stature and seemed to be carrying what looked like a large bag or backpack. Most significantly, Watkins remembered hearing what might have been raised voices, though the distance made it impossible to understand what was being said. "I wish I'd paid more attention at the time," Watkins said, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he spoke. "If I'd known someone was in trouble, I would have driven down there to check on them. But you don't expect something like that to happen in your own backyard." The interview with Watkins prompted Detective Chen to examine Robert's case files for any connection to the Boulder Creek area. What she discovered was troubling. 3 months before his disappearance, Robert had been investigating a series of burglaries in rural areas east of Fresno, including several properties in the same general region where his badge was found. The burglary cases had involved a sophisticated criminal operation that targeted remote homes and ranches, stealing valuable items while leaving minimal evidence behind. Robert's notes indicated that he suspected the crimes were being committed by someone with knowledge of law enforcement procedures, possibly even someone with police or military training. One of the burglarized properties belonged to Marcus Webb, a retired mining engineer who owned a secluded cabin just 5 miles from Boulder Creek. Webb's cabin had been ransacked in June 2010, with thieves making off with valuable mining equipment, firearms, and historical artifacts that Webb had collected over his 40-year career. The break-in had been particularly brazen, occurring in broad daylight when Webb was away visiting family in Los Angeles. Detective Chen discovered that Robert had interviewed Webb twice about the burglary, and his notes suggested that he believed the crime was connected to a larger pattern of thefts in the area. More intriguingly, Robert's last case report, filed just 2 days before his disappearance, indicated that he had developed a lead in the Webb burglary case and planned to conduct surveillance in the Boulder Creek area. This revelation completely changed the perspective on Robert's disappearance. Rather than being on a recreational hiking trip, Robert may have been conducting an undercover investigation when he vanished. His service weapons, which were never found, supported this theory. Robert would have been armed if he was working a case rather than hiking for pleasure. The investigation team decided to re-interview Marcus Webb, now 78, and living in Sacramento with his daughter. Webb remembered Detective Mitchell clearly, describing him as thorough and persistent in his questioning about the burglary. Detective Mitchell was convinced that whoever robbed my place knew exactly what they were looking for, Webb told investigators. He kept asking about who had access to my property, who knew about the valuable items I kept there, and whether I'd noticed anyone suspicious in the area before the break-in. Webb also revealed a detail that hadn't been included in the original burglary report. A few days before the theft, he had noticed fresh tire tracks on the access road that led to his cabin, tracks that didn't match his own vehicle or those of his regular visitors. He had mentioned this to Detective Mitchell during their final interview, and Robert had seemed particularly interested in this information. The connection between the burglary investigation and Robert's disappearance opened up new avenues for the current investigation team. Detective Chen began researching other unsolved property crimes in the region from 2010. looking for patterns that might indicate a coordinated criminal operation. What she found was alarming. Between May and September 2010, there had been 12 burglaries in the remote areas east of Fresno, including several cases that had never been definitively solved. The crimes showed signs of sophisticated planning and execution, with perpetrators who seemed to have intimate knowledge of law enforcement response times and investigative procedures. Most disturbing was the timing of the crime pattern. The burglaries had stopped abruptly in late September 2010, just days after Robert Mitchell's disappearance. This correlation suggested that Robert's investigation had gotten close enough to the criminals to pose a serious threat to their operation. Detective Chen's team began developing a new theory about what had happened to Robert Mitchell. If he had indeed been conducting surveillance in the Boulder Creek area as part of his burglary investigation, he may have stumbled upon the criminals in the act of committing another crime or using the area as a staging ground for their operations. The theory gained support when investigators discovered that several of the burglarized properties had been scouted using the same remote access roads that Eugene Watkins had seen the suspicious vehicle using. The criminals appeared to have developed a detailed knowledge of the area's geography, using lesser-known routes to avoid detection while transporting stolen goods. As the investigation progressed, Detective Chen realized that solving Robert Mitchell's disappearance might require uncovering a complex criminal operation that had remained hidden for over a decade. The badge in the creek was just the beginning of what promised to be a much larger and more complicated case. The investigation into Robert Mitchell's disappearance took a dramatic turn when Detective Lisa Chen uncovered evidence of a sophisticated criminal network that had been operating in the Sierra Nevada foothills for years. What began as a burglary investigation had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous than anyone had initially imagined. Working with federal agencies and neighboring law enforcement departments, Detective Chen's team discovered that the 2010 burglaries around Fresno were part of a much larger criminal operation that had been targeting remote properties across multiple counties. The thieves weren't random opportunists. They were members of an organized group with inside knowledge of law enforcement procedures and intimate familiarity with the mountainous terrain. The breakthrough came when investigators cross-referenced the timing and methods of the 2010 burglaries with similar crimes reported in Madera, Tuolumne, and Mariposa counties during the same period. The pattern was unmistakable. Rural properties were being systematically targeted by criminals who knew exactly when owners would be away, what valuables were stored on the premises, and how to access remote locations without being detected. FBI Special Agent Maria Santos, who specialized in organized crime investigations, joined the Mitchell case team after reviewing the expanded evidence. What we're seeing here is characteristic of a criminal organization with law enforcement connections. Agent Santos explained to Detective Chen, "These aren't ordinary burglars. They're operating with the kind of intelligence and coordination that suggests inside information." The federal investigation revealed that the criminal network had been using the Boulder Creek area as a staging ground for their operations. The remote location provided an ideal base where stolen goods could be stored, sorted, and prepared for transport to buyers in larger cities. The area's difficult terrain and lack of regular law enforcement patrols made it nearly impossible to detect the illegal activities. More disturbing was the discovery that the criminal organization had been monitoring law enforcement radio communications, allowing them to track investigation progress and avoid areas where police activity was focused. This capability explained how they had managed to evade capture for so long, and suggested that someone with access to police communications equipment was involved in the operation. Detective Chen's review of Robert Mitchell's personal effects revealed that he had suspected the radio monitoring capability. His final case notes included observations about how quickly burglary sites were abandoned whenever police began investigating in specific areas. Robert had begun using alternative communication methods and had stopped filing detailed reports electronically, apparently concerned that sensitive information was being compromised. The investigation team discovered that Robert had developed a confidential informant in the weeks before his disappearance. According to encrypted notes found in Robert's personal files, someone with knowledge of the criminal network had agreed to provide information in exchange for protection and consideration in any future charges. The informant's identity was protected by a code name, Mountain King, and their communications with Robert had been conducted through anonymous message drops. The final message from Mountain King, dated September 16, 2010, just 2 days before Robert's disappearance, contained an urgent warning. They know about the investigation. Meeting compromised. Boulder Creek not safe. They have someone inside. This message suggested that Robert had been walking into a trap when he went to the Boulder Creek area. Agent Santos and Detective Chen began the delicate process of identifying Mountain King, hoping that the informant might still be alive and willing to provide information about what happened to Robert Mitchell. The coded communication system that Robert had used was sophisticated, involving multiple layers of security that suggested he had been deeply concerned about the safety of his informant. The search for Mountain King led investigators to Tommy Castellanos, a 54-year-old mechanic who had operated a small garage in the mountain community of Coulterville. Castellanos had a minor criminal record involving stolen vehicle parts, but he had been trying to turn his life around and had apparently become troubled by the criminal activity he witnessed in the area. When investigators located Castellanos in Stockton, where he had moved shortly after Robert's disappearance, they found a man haunted by years of fear and guilt. Castellanos admitted to being Mountain King and revealed the full scope of what he had witnessed in 2010. Detective Mitchell was trying to protect me, Castellanos told investigators through tears. I'd seen things that could have brought down the whole operation, and I was scared they were going to kill me. When I found out they had someone inside the police department feeding them information, I knew I had to warn him. Castellanos described a criminal network that included at least 6 active members, led by a former police officer who had been dismissed from a neighboring department under suspicious circumstances. The organization had been operating for several years, targeting not only private properties, but also government facilities and construction sites where valuable equipment was stored. The most shocking revelation was that the network had been planning to eliminate Robert Mitchell even before he arrived at Boulder Creek. Castellanos had overheard conversations about taking care of the detective and had tried to warn Robert through their established communication system, but it appeared the message had arrived too late. They knew he was getting close, Castellanos explained. The leader, the ex-cop, he said Mitchell was asking too many of the right questions and had to be stopped before he could make any arrests. They lured him to Boulder Creek by leaking false information about a major theft being planned there. The revelation that Robert's disappearance was a planned execution rather than a random encounter changed the entire direction of the investigation. Detective Chen's team began focusing on identifying the former police officer who had led the criminal network and determining which current or former law enforcement personnel might have provided inside information. The investigation revealed that the criminal organization had disbanded shortly after Robert's disappearance, with members scattering to different locations across California and neighboring states. Some had been arrested for unrelated crimes in the intervening years, while others had apparently succeeded in creating new identities and legitimate lives for themselves. Agent Santos explained that the advanced planning and execution of Robert's elimination suggested that the criminal network had viewed him as an existential threat to their operation. Detective Mitchell wasn't just investigating burglaries, she said. He had uncovered evidence of a criminal conspiracy that could have resulted in decades of prison time for everyone involved. They killed him to protect themselves. The federal investigation expanded to include the use of advanced forensic techniques to search for Robert's remains in the Boulder Creek area. Ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs were deployed to search locations that might have been used to conceal a body, while underwater recovery teams searched deeper pools in the creek system where remains might have been weighted down. Tommy Castellanos agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation, providing detailed information about the criminal network's membership, methods, and possible hiding places where evidence might still be found. His testimony would be crucial in building cases against the surviving members of the organization and finally bringing justice for Robert Mitchell's murder. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Robert Mitchell had died because he was an honest police officer who refused to be intimidated or corrupted. His dedication to justice had cost him his life, but it had also preserved the evidence that would eventually expose the criminals who killed him. 14 years after Detective Robert Mitchell's disappearance, the investigation finally began to yield the answers that his family and colleagues had desperately sought. The testimony of Tommy Castellanos, combined with advanced forensic analysis and federal resources, started to unravel the criminal conspiracy that had claimed Robert's life. The breakthrough in the case came when investigators successfully identified the former police officer who had led the criminal network. Through cross-referencing employment records, disciplinary actions, and timeline analysis, the investigation team determined that the organization had been led by Derek Hoffman, a former deputy sheriff from Mariposa County who had been terminated in 2009 for suspected corruption and excessive use of force. Hoffman's dismissal from law enforcement had been quietly handled to avoid public scrutiny, but internal records revealed a pattern of suspicious behavior, including unexplained wealth, associations with known criminals, and allegations of evidence tampering. After his termination, Hoffman had apparently used his law enforcement training and contacts to establish the burglary network that had plagued the region in 2010. FBI Special Agent Maria Santos led a multi-agency task force that located Hoffman living under an assumed identity in Phoenix, Arizona, where he had been working as a private security consultant. When agents arrested him at his suburban home on federal charges related to Robert Mitchell's murder, they discovered a cache of weapons, false identification documents, and detailed records of the criminal organization's activities. The arrest of Derek Hoffman sent shockwaves through law enforcement communities across Central California. The revelation that a former deputy sheriff had orchestrated the murder of an active police detective represented one of the most serious cases of law enforcement corruption in the region's history. Hoffman initially refused to cooperate with investigators, maintaining his innocence despite overwhelming evidence linking him to the criminal network. However, the testimony of Tommy Castellanos, combined with physical evidence and financial records, painted a clear picture of Hoffman's role as the organization's leader and the primary architect of Robert Mitchell's murder. The investigation revealed that Hoffman's network had generated over $2 million in stolen property between 2008 and 2010, with proceeds being laundered through a series of legitimate businesses and offshore accounts. The organization had operated with military-style precision, using surveillance equipment, encrypted communications, and sophisticated planning to avoid detection. Detective Lisa Chen's team also uncovered evidence that the criminal network had been preparing to expand their operations beyond simple burglary. Seized documents revealed plans to target armored car services, bank branches in remote areas, and even law enforcement evidence storage facilities. Robert Mitchell's investigation had apparently disrupted these plans just as they were being finalized. The search for Robert's remains intensified after Hoffman's arrest, with investigators using information from seized documents to focus on specific locations around Boulder Creek. The combination of ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and underwater search equipment finally yielded results when teams discovered human remains buried in a shallow grave, approximately 2 miles from where Robert's badge had been found. The remains were transported to the Fresno County Coroner's Office for forensic analysis, and dental records confirmed what everyone had feared but hoped against. The body was that of Detective Robert Mitchell. The medical examiner determined that Robert had died from gunshot wounds, confirming that his death was indeed a homicide rather than an accident. For Sarah Mitchell and her children, the discovery of Robert's remains brought a mixture of grief and relief. After 14 years of uncertainty, they finally had definitive answers about their husband and father's fate. The knowledge that Robert had died in the line of duty, trying to expose criminal activity, provided some solace amid their renewed sorrow. Dad always said that being a police officer meant standing up for what's right, even when it's dangerous, Michael Mitchell said during a press conference announcing the discovery. Now we know that he died because he refused to look the other way when he uncovered corruption and criminal activity. That's exactly the kind of man he was. The Mitchell family's long ordeal had finally reached a resolution, but their fight for justice was far from over. Derek Hoffman faced federal charges including murder of a law enforcement officer, conspiracy, and racketeering, charges that could result in a death sentence if he were convicted. Several other members of the criminal network were also arrested on related charges. The investigation also revealed the identity of the law enforcement insider who had been providing information to Hoffman's organization. Detective Frank Morrison, who had led the original investigation into Robert's disappearance, was arrested on charges of obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Morrison had apparently been feeding information to the criminal network about investigation progress and had deliberately misdirected the search efforts to prevent Robert's body from being discovered. The revelation that Morrison had been corrupt from the beginning explained many of the investigative failures that had allowed the case to remain unsolved for so long. His deliberate misdirection of the original search, failure to follow up on crucial witness statements, and suppression of evidence had protected the criminals at the expense of justice for Robert Mitchell. Morrison's arrest sent additional shockwaves through the Fresno Police Department, forcing a comprehensive review of cases he had handled during his career. Several other investigations were reopened based on concerns that Morrison's corruption might have affected their outcomes. The Robert Mitchell case became a catalyst for broader reforms in law enforcement oversight and accountability. The failure to detect Morrison's corruption for over a decade highlighted systemic weaknesses in internal affairs processes and the need for more rigorous monitoring of police officer conduct and associations. If this case has already gripped you, please leave a like. It helps the channel bring more stories like this and helps Robert Mitchell's story reach more people. The legal proceedings against Derek Hoffman and his co-conspirators promised to be lengthy and complex, with prosecutors building cases that spanned multiple jurisdictions and involved years of criminal activity. The testimony of Tommy Castellanos would be crucial in establishing the timeline of events and the specific roles of each defendant in Robert's murder. For the law enforcement community, the Mitchell case served as a sobering reminder of the dangers faced by officers who investigate corruption within their own ranks. Robert's dedication to justice had cost him his life, but his sacrifice had ultimately exposed a criminal conspiracy and brought corrupt officers to account. The badge that had been discovered in Boulder Creek became a symbol of Robert's unwavering commitment to duty and justice. Though tarnished by years underwater, it represented the integrity and courage that had defined his career and ultimately led to the resolution of his own case. The trial of Derek Hoffman and his co-conspirators for the murder of Detective Robert Mitchell began 18 months after the discovery of Robert's remains, drawing national attention to what prosecutors called one of the most egregious cases of law enforcement corruption in California history. The proceedings would not only determine the fate of the defendants, but also provide a public accounting of the events that led to Robert's death. Federal prosecutor Amanda Richardson led the government's case, supported by a team of attorneys specializing in organized crime and police corruption. The charges against Hoffman included first-degree murder of a federal law enforcement officer, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and multiple counts related to the burglary operation. If convicted on all charges, Hoffman faced the possibility of execution. The prosecution's case rested heavily on the testimony of Tommy Castellanos, the former mechanic who had served as Robert's informant and witnessed the planning of the detective's murder. Despite concerns about his own safety, Castellanos had agreed to testify in exchange for witness protection and a reduced sentence for his minor role in the criminal organization. Castellanos' testimony provided chilling details about the final days of Robert Mitchell's life. He described overhearing conversations in which Hoffman discussed the need to eliminate the problem posed by Robert's investigation. According to Castellanos, Hoffman had become increasingly paranoid about the detective's progress and had decided that murder was the only way to protect the criminal organization. Hoffman said that Detective Mitchell was asking too many questions and getting too close to the truth. Castellanos testified, his voice shaking as he spoke. He said they had to make it look like an accident, like the detective had just disappeared while hiking, but I knew they were planning to kill him. The prosecution also presented evidence seized from Hoffman's home, including detailed records of the criminal organization's activities and communications equipment used to monitor police radio frequencies. Financial records showed that Hoffman had accumulated significant wealth through the burglary operation, far exceeding what he could have earned through legitimate employment. FBI forensic specialists testified about the evidence recovered from the Boulder Creek area, including ballistics analysis that matched bullet fragments found near Robert's remains to a weapon seized from one of Hoffman's associates. The forensic evidence established that Robert had been killed at the location where his body was found, contradicting any theory that his death had been accidental. Detective Lisa Chen testified about the original investigation's failures and the role that Detective Frank Morrison's corruption had played in preventing the case from being solved earlier. Her testimony revealed how Morrison had deliberately misdirected search efforts and suppressed evidence that might have led to the discovery of Robert's body years earlier. Detective Morrison's actions weren't just corrupt. They were a betrayal of everything we swear to uphold as law enforcement officers, Detective Chen testified. His deliberate sabotage of the investigation allowed Detective Mitchell's killers to escape justice for over a decade. Morrison, who was being tried separately on corruption charges, attempted to negotiate a plea agreement in exchange for his testimony against Hoffman. However, prosecutors rejected his offer, determined to hold him fully accountable for his role in obstructing the investigation into Robert's murder. The defense team, led by prominent criminal attorney David Walsh, attempted to challenge the reliability of Tommy Castellanos' testimony and question the chain of custody for physical evidence that had been recovered years after the crime. Walsh argued that his client had been the victim of a vindictive prosecution based on circumstantial evidence and the unreliable testimony of a criminal seeking to reduce his own sentence. The government's case relies on the word of an admitted criminal who has every reason to lie to save himself from prosecution, Walsh argued during his opening statement. They're asking you to convict my client of the most serious crimes imaginable based on speculation and the testimony of someone who admittedly participated in criminal activity. However, the defense strategy crumbled under the weight of physical evidence and corroborating testimony from multiple witnesses. Former associates of Hoffman testified about his violent tendencies and his paranoid behavior regarding law enforcement investigations. Several described conversations in which Hoffman had discussed the need to eliminate threats to his criminal organization. The prosecution's most powerful moments came when Sarah Mitchell and her children testified about the impact of Robert's disappearance on their family. Sarah's testimony about 14 years of uncertainty and grief provided a human face to the crimes that Hoffman was accused of committing. Every day for 14 years, I wondered if Robert might walk through our front door, Sarah testified, tears streaming down her face. I kept his coffee cup on the counter, his clothes in the closet, always hoping that maybe he was just lost somewhere and would find his way home. Now I know that hope was stolen from us by people who cared more about money than human life. Michael and Jennifer Mitchell testified about growing up without their father, missing graduations, weddings, and the birth of grandchildren that Robert would never meet. Their impact statements provided powerful testimony about the lasting consequences of the defendant's actions. Expert witnesses testified about the sophisticated nature of the criminal organization that Hoffman had led, explaining how the group had used law enforcement techniques and inside information to avoid detection. The testimony established that Robert's murder had been part of a calculated effort to protect a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. The trial lasted 3 months, with extensive media coverage bringing national attention to the case. The proceedings exposed not only the details of Robert's murder, but also broader issues related to police corruption and the challenges of investigating crimes within law enforcement agencies. During closing arguments, prosecutor Amanda Richardson emphasized that Robert Mitchell had died because he represented everything that Derek Hoffman and his associates opposed: integrity, dedication to justice, and an unwillingness to be corrupted or intimidated. Detective Robert Mitchell died because he was a good police officer, Richardson told the jury. He died because he refused to look the other way when he discovered criminal activity. He died because the defendants valued their illegal profits more than human life. That's not just murder. It's an attack on the very foundation of law and order in our society. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on all major charges against Derek Hoffman. The unanimous verdict brought relief to the Mitchell family and satisfaction to the law enforcement officers who had worked tirelessly to solve the case. Hoffman was sentenced to death for the murder of Robert Mitchell, while his co-conspirators received lengthy prison sentences for their roles in the criminal organization. Frank Morrison was convicted separately and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for his corruption and obstruction of justice. The convictions marked the end of a long journey toward justice for Robert Mitchell and his family. The case had exposed corruption within law enforcement ranks and demonstrated the importance of persistence in pursuing justice, even when cases seem impossible to solve. The conviction of Derek Hoffman and the revelation of Frank Morrison's corruption sent shockwaves throughout California's law enforcement community, triggering the most comprehensive investigation of police misconduct in the state's history. What began as the murder trial of a single detective had exposed a web of corruption that reached into multiple agencies and threatened public trust in the entire criminal justice system. Internal affairs investigators from agencies across Central California began reviewing every case that Morrison had handled during his 23-year career with the Fresno Police Department. The scope of his corruption became clear as investigators discovered that he had been providing information to criminal organizations for over a decade, compromising dozens of investigations and potentially allowing dangerous criminals to escape prosecution. Captain Rebecca Torres, who headed the internal investigation, described Morrison's betrayal as one of the most extensive corruption cases in department history. Detective Morrison didn't just fail to solve the Mitchell case, Captain Torres explained to a packed press conference. He actively sabotaged it and numerous other investigations, placing officers and civilians at risk while protecting criminal organizations that were victimizing our community. The investigation revealed that Morrison's corruption had begun years before Robert Mitchell's murder. Financial records showed unexplained deposits into Morrison's personal accounts dating back to 2007, suggesting that he had been receiving payments from criminal sources for an extended period. The timing of these payments corresponded with the dismissal or reduction of charges in several high-profile cases that Morrison had investigated. One of the most troubling discoveries was that Morrison had provided advance warning to criminal organizations about planned raids and arrests, allowing suspects to flee or dispose of evidence before law enforcement operations could be executed. This intelligence sharing had resulted in the failure of multiple investigations and had potentially contributed to additional crimes that could have been prevented. The corruption scandal forced the Fresno Police Department to implement sweeping reforms designed to prevent similar betrayals in the future. New oversight procedures were established for detective work, including mandatory review of case files by multiple supervisors and regular audits of detective communications and financial records. Police Chief Maria Santos announced the creation of a special unit dedicated to investigating corruption within the department, staffed by officers with no previous connections to potentially compromised cases. The unit would have direct reporting authority to federal agencies and would operate independently of normal departmental command structures. The Mitchell case has taught us that corruption can hide in plain sight for years if we don't have adequate safeguards in place, Chief Santos said. We're implementing the most comprehensive integrity monitoring system in our department's history to ensure that something like this can never happen again. The investigation also revealed that Hoffman's criminal organization had been more extensive than initially believed. Financial analysis showed that the group had stolen over $3 million worth of property during their years of operation, with stolen goods being fenced through a network of corrupt dealers and legitimate businesses that served as fronts for money laundering operations. Federal agents arrested additional members of Hoffman's organization in coordinated raids across California, Nevada, and Arizona. The arrests included several business owners who had knowingly purchased stolen goods and helped launder criminal proceeds through their legitimate enterprises. The scope of the criminal network shocked investigators who had initially believed they were dealing with a relatively small local operation. The impact of Morrison's corruption extended far beyond the Mitchell case. Defense attorneys across the region began filing motions to overturn convictions in cases where Morrison had been the primary investigator, arguing that his proven corruption cast doubt on the integrity of any evidence he had handled. Several convicted criminals were released from prison when prosecutors were unable to verify the authenticity of evidence that Morrison had collected. Tommy Castellanos, whose cooperation had been crucial in solving Robert's murder, was relocated through the Federal Witness Protection Program after receiving credible threats against his life. The threats were traced to associates of the criminal organization who remained at large, highlighting the ongoing dangers faced by those who chose to cooperate with law enforcement. The Mitchell family found themselves at the center of a media storm as the corruption scandal generated national headlines and became the subject of numerous true crime documentaries and investigative reports. While grateful for the attention that helped ensure justice for Robert, the family struggled with the constant reminders of their loss and the revelation of how extensively his murder had been covered up. Sarah Mitchell became an advocate for police reform and victims' rights, speaking at conferences and legislative hearings about the need for stronger oversight of law enforcement agencies. Her testimony before the California State Legislature contributed to the passage of new laws requiring independent investigation of officer misconduct and creating stronger protections for police officers who report corruption within their agencies. Robert died because he was trying to expose corruption and criminal activity, Sarah told legislators. We can't let his sacrifice be meaningless. We need to create systems that protect honest officers and prevent corrupt ones from betraying their oath and their communities. The case also sparked broader discussions about the challenges of policing remote rural areas where criminal organizations could operate with relative impunity. The vast distances and limited law enforcement presence in mountainous regions of California had provided ideal conditions for Hoffman's organization to thrive, highlighting the need for better coordination between agencies and improved surveillance of isolated areas. Federal funding was allocated to improve law enforcement communications in rural areas and to provide advanced training for officers working in remote regions. The initiatives were designed to prevent criminal organizations from exploiting the geographic and resource limitations that had allowed Hoffman's group to operate undetected for so long. The investigation into Hoffman's organization continued even after his conviction, with investigators working to identify additional victims and recover stolen property that remained missing. The complex nature of the criminal enterprise meant that some aspects of the case would likely remain under investigation for years to come. For law enforcement officers throughout California, the Mitchell case served as a sobering reminder of the importance of integrity and the devastating consequences of corruption. Police academies incorporated the case into their ethics training, using Robert's story to illustrate both the dangers faced by honest officers and the responsibility that all law enforcement personnel have to report misconduct when they encounter it. Detective Lisa Chen, who had led the investigation that finally solved Robert's murder, was promoted to sergeant and assigned to head the department's new anti-corruption unit. Her persistence in pursuing the case despite institutional obstacles had not only brought justice for Robert Mitchell, but had also exposed systemic problems that threatened the integrity of law enforcement throughout the region. The badge that had been discovered in Boulder Creek was returned to the Mitchell family after serving as evidence in the trials. Sarah had it restored and mounted alongside Robert's service commendations and photographs from his career. The badge, once tarnished by years underwater, now served as a symbol of his integrity and the ultimate triumph of justice over corruption. 5 years after Derek Hoffman's conviction for the murder of Detective Robert Mitchell, the impact of the case continued to resonate throughout law enforcement communities and beyond. What had begun as the investigation of a missing police officer had evolved into a catalyst for comprehensive reforms that changed how agencies across the country approach internal corruption and cold case investigations. The Robert Mitchell Police Integrity Act, signed into law by the California governor in 2025, established mandatory protocols for investigating missing law enforcement officers and created independent oversight bodies to monitor potential corruption within police agencies. The legislation was directly inspired by the failures that had allowed Morrison's corruption to go undetected and had prevented Robert's case from being solved for over a decade. Sarah Mitchell, now serving on the state's newly created Police Accountability Commission, had become a prominent voice in law enforcement reform. Her transformation from grieving widow to policy advocate illustrated how personal tragedy could drive meaningful change in institutional structures that had previously seemed immutable. Robert always believed that good police work could make a real difference in people's lives, Sarah said during the legislation's signing ceremony. This law ensures that when officers like Robert try to do the right thing, they have the protection and support they need. And when officers betray their oath like Morrison did, they'll be held accountable. The Mitchell case had also transformed how cold case units operate across the country. Detective Lisa Chen, now Captain Chen, led a team that provided training and consultation to law enforcement agencies dealing with long unsolved cases involving missing officers. Her methodology, developed during the Mitchell investigation, had been successfully applied to dozens of other cold cases. The techniques developed during Robert's investigation, including the systematic re-examination of archived evidence and the integration of advanced forensic technology with traditional detective work had become standard procedures for cold case units nationwide. The case demonstrated how persistence and modern investigative tools could overcome even the most sophisticated attempts to conceal crimes. Tommy Castellanos, living under a new identity in the Federal Witness Protection Program, had found peace in his new life while knowing that his testimony had finally brought justice for Robert Mitchell. His decision to come forward, despite the personal risk, had been crucial in breaking the conspiracy of silence that had protected Robert's killers for over a decade. The Boulder Creek area, once known only to local hikers and criminals, had been transformed into a memorial site honoring Robert Mitchell and other law enforcement officers who had died in the line of duty. A trail marker near the location where Robert's body was found provided information about his life and service, ensuring that visitors would understand the significance of the area. The memorial had become a destination for law enforcement officers from across the country who came to pay their respects to a colleague who had died defending the principles of justice and integrity. The site served as a powerful reminder of the personal costs associated with police work and the importance of supporting officers who choose to confront corruption and criminal activity. Michael Mitchell, now a successful software engineer, had used his technical skills to create a database that tracked patterns in unsolved cases involving missing law enforcement officers. His volunteer work with the National Association of Police Organizations had helped identify potential connections between cases that might otherwise have been overlooked by individual agencies. Dad always said that police work was about connecting the dots and finding patterns that others missed, Michael explained during a conference presentation about his database project. I'm using technology to help do the same thing on a national scale, looking for connections that might help solve other cases like his. Jennifer Mitchell, working as a nurse practitioner in a rural clinic, had chosen a career path that allowed her to serve others in ways that honored her father's memory. Her work in an underserved community reflected the same commitment to helping others that had defined Robert's career in law enforcement. The criminal organization that Derek Hoffman had led was completely dismantled, with the last of its members being convicted and sentenced in 2026. The network's sophisticated operations had been thoroughly documented, providing law enforcement agencies with valuable intelligence about how organized crime groups exploit weaknesses in rural policing and interagency communication. The financial assets recovered from the criminal organization were used to establish the Robert Mitchell Foundation, which provided scholarships for children of law enforcement officers and funded advanced training programs for police investigators. The foundation ensured that Robert's legacy would continue to benefit future generations of law enforcement professionals. Derek Hoffman remained on death row at San Quentin State Prison, having exhausted most of his legal appeals. His case had become a study in how former law enforcement officers could use their training and connections to organize sophisticated criminal enterprises, providing valuable lessons for those responsible for preventing similar corruption. Frank Morrison died in federal prison in 2027, 3 years into his 20-year sentence. His death marked the end of a career that had betrayed everything he had sworn to uphold as a police officer. His corruption had not only facilitated Robert's murder, but had also compromised dozens of other investigations and allowed dangerous criminals to escape justice. Detective work in the Sierra Nevada foothills had been revolutionized by the lessons learned from the Mitchell case. Interagency cooperation had been strengthened, communication protocols had been improved, and new technology had been deployed to monitor remote areas where criminal activity might otherwise go undetected. The annual Robert Mitchell Memorial Conference brought together law enforcement officers, forensic specialists, and reform advocates to discuss best practices in corruption prevention and cold case investigation. The conference had become one of the most respected professional development events in American law enforcement. For the residents of Fresno and surrounding communities, the resolution of Robert Mitchell's case had restored some measure of faith in their local law enforcement agencies. The comprehensive reforms implemented in response to the corruption scandal had created more transparent and accountable police departments that were better equipped to serve and protect their communities. The investigation techniques developed during the Mitchell case continued to yield results in other cold cases. Advanced forensic analysis, systematic re-examination of archived evidence, and improved witness protection programs had contributed to solving dozens of previously unsolvable crimes across California and other states. The case had also highlighted the importance of protecting law enforcement officers who report misconduct within their agencies. New whistleblower protections and anonymous reporting systems had been implemented to encourage officers to come forward when they witnessed corruption or criminal activity among their colleagues. Robert Mitchell's badge, restored to its original shine and mounted in a place of honor in the Mitchell family home, served as a daily reminder of his integrity and sacrifice. The badge represented not just his career in law enforcement, but also his unwavering commitment to justice that had ultimately cost him his life and led to his vindication. The creek where Robert's badge was discovered had been renamed Mitchell Creek in his honor, ensuring that future generations would remember the detective who had died trying to expose corruption and protect his community. The natural setting provided a peaceful place for reflection on the costs of justice and the importance of integrity in public service. 25 years have passed since Detective Robert Mitchell kissed his wife goodbye and headed into the Sierra Nevada mountains, never to return alive. His story, once buried beneath years of corruption and cover-up, has become a testament to the power of persistence and the ultimate triumph of justice over institutional failure. Sarah Mitchell, now in her 70s, continues her work with the Police Accountability Commission while maintaining the memorial garden she created at their family home in Clovis. The garden features native California plants and a small memorial stone inscribed with Robert's badge number and the words he lived by: "Protect and serve with integrity." Every morning, she still sets out his coffee cup, not from hope of his return, but as a ritual of remembrance for the man who chose duty over safety. The children who grew up without their father have built lives that honor his memory in their own unique ways. Michael Mitchell's database of unsolved law enforcement cases has contributed to solving over 40 cold cases nationwide, proving that technology and dedication can overcome even the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies. His work has been adopted by federal agencies and is now taught at law enforcement academies across the country. Jennifer Mitchell established a rural health clinic that serves the same remote communities where her father once worked. Her facility provides medical care to ranchers, loggers, and other residents of the Sierra Nevada foothills, many of whom remember Robert's dedication to protecting their isolated communities. The clinic bears his name and operates on the same principles of service and integrity that defined his career. The Robert Mitchell Police Academy, built with funds recovered from Derek Hoffman's criminal organization, has graduated over 500 new officers trained in advanced ethics, corruption prevention, and cold case investigation techniques. The Academy's curriculum includes extensive case study analysis of the Mitchell investigation, ensuring that future law enforcement professionals understand both the dangers of corruption and the importance of never giving up on seeking justice. Detective Lisa Chen, now Chief Chen of a reformed Fresno Police Department, regularly speaks at law enforcement conferences about the importance of institutional accountability and the courage required to challenge corruption within one's own organization. Her leadership of the Mitchell investigation has become a model for how cold cases should be approached, combining advanced technology with traditional detective work and unwavering persistence. The Boulder Creek area has been transformed into the Detective Robert Mitchell Memorial Trail, a 5-mile hiking path that winds through the mountainous terrain where he conducted his final investigation. Educational markers along the trail tell the story of his life, career, and sacrifice, while also highlighting the importance of environmental conservation and wilderness safety. The trail has become a pilgrimage site for law enforcement officers from around the world who come to honor a colleague who paid the ultimate price for his integrity. Tommy Castellanos, whose courage in coming forward had been instrumental in solving the case, passed away peacefully in 2029 under his protected identity. Before his death, he recorded a video testimony for the Robert Mitchell Foundation, describing the detective as the only cop who cared more about doing right than staying safe. His final words served as a reminder that justice often depends on ordinary people finding extraordinary courage when confronted with evil. The criminal network that had operated in the Sierra Nevada foothills was completely eradicated, with the last associate of Hoffman's organization being sentenced in 2028. The comprehensive investigation had recovered over $4 million in stolen property and assets, much of which was returned to victims or used to fund law enforcement improvements and victim support programs. Derek Hoffman was executed at San Quentin in 2030, maintaining his innocence until the end, despite overwhelming evidence of his guilt. His death marked the final chapter in a case that had spanned 2 decades and forever changed how law enforcement agencies approach internal corruption and cold case investigations. The execution was witnessed by Sarah Mitchell, who said afterward that justice had finally been served for her husband and all the victims of Hoffman's criminal organization. The techniques developed during the Mitchell investigation continued to revolutionize cold case work across the country. The systematic re-examination of archived evidence, combined with advances in forensic science and database technology, had led to the resolution of hundreds of previously unsolvable cases. Law enforcement agencies worldwide had adopted the Mitchell Protocol, a comprehensive approach to investigating missing officer cases that ensured no stone was left unturned. The annual memorial service held on the anniversary of Robert's disappearance has grown from a small family gathering to a major law enforcement ceremony attended by thousands. The service not only honors Robert's memory, but also pays tribute to all officers who have died in the line of duty while fighting corruption and criminal organizations. The Mitchell case has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and academic studies, examining the intersection of law enforcement corruption, organized crime, and the importance of institutional accountability. The case study is now required reading in criminal justice programs across the country, ensuring that future law enforcement professionals understand the lessons learned from Robert's sacrifice. The creek where Robert's badge was discovered continues to flow through the Sierra Nevada mountains, its clear waters carrying the memory of a detective who refused to be silenced by corruption. The badge itself, carefully preserved and displayed at the Robert Mitchell Memorial Museum in Fresno, serves as a tangible reminder that integrity and truth will ultimately prevail, even when buried beneath years of lies and cover-up. For the thousands of law enforcement officers who have visited the memorial site, Robert Mitchell's story serves as both inspiration and warning. His dedication to justice cost him his life, but his sacrifice exposed corruption that might otherwise have continued for decades, protecting countless future victims from the criminal organization he died investigating. The Sierra Nevada mountains, where Robert spent his final moments fighting for justice, stand as eternal witnesses to his courage. The trails he walked, the streams he crossed, and the wilderness he loved have become hallowed ground for those who understand that some battles are worth dying for, and some truths are worth any sacrifice to reveal. Today, when young police officers take their oath to protect and serve, many think of Detective Robert Mitchell and the choice he made to pursue justice even when it led into danger. His story reminds them that wearing a badge means more than carrying authority. It means carrying the responsibility to do what's right, regardless of the personal cost. The legacy of Robert Mitchell lives on in every case solved by officers who refuse to give up, every act of courage by those who expose corruption, and every moment when someone chooses integrity over safety. His story proves that even in death, a good officer continues to protect and serve, inspiring others to carry forward the torch of justice that he lit with his life. The mountains remember, the badge endures. And Detective Robert Mitchell's commitment to justice continues to shine like a beacon for all who follow in his footsteps, proving that some lights can never be extinguished, no matter how deep the darkness that tries to hide them. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases. Thank you for following the story of Detective Robert Mitchell. We'll see you in the next video.